My name is Meredith Shaw. I'm 44 years old, a retired lieutenant colonel in the United States Army. I've served in 3 war zones, buried good soldiers, and carried secrets that never made it into reports. But none of that prepared me for what happened the day my own brother stood in open court and screamed, "She's not a real soldier." The room went silent. Dozens of eyes turned to me, waiting for a reaction. I gave them nothing. I stood up, walked slowly toward the judge, and laid a thin tan folder on his bench. That folder had followed me through 2 deployments and sat untouched in my fireproof safe for nearly 2 years. The judge opened it. He didn't speak at first. His brow tightened. Then he looked up, voice low but clear. "Close the doors. No one leaves this room." And just like that, 2 military police officers stepped through the side entrance uniforms, crisp movements sharp. The air shifted. My brother's lawyer dropped the file in his hands. My mother turned pale. Sophie, my younger sister, didn't look up from the floor. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. That moment, the looks on their faces, the shock, the fear, the unraveling, wasn't a victory. It wasn't even justice. It was simply the truth walking into the room without apology. I hadn't come to prove I was a soldier. I had come to remind them I never stopped being one. Before you hear the whole story behind that moment, if you've ever been abandoned, hurt by your own family, and still forced to smile through it, leave a comment. I'm not telling this to complain, but because, maybe somewhere, you've felt what I felt. Now, let me take you back to where it all truly began. The wind coming off the Pacific was sharper than I remembered. Saltwind, Oregon had always been a cold town on the cliffs, in the air, and in the people. But for a moment, standing on the porch of my father's house, it felt like coming home. After 23 years in uniform, I didn't want a parade or a welcome committee. I wanted silence. I wanted the sound of seagulls and rusted hinges, the smell of wet pine and old wood. This house was the only thing left of my father, and he'd left it to me. Not Trevor, not Sophie. Me. For a few weeks, I allowed myself to believe that would be enough. The estate had been divided without much drama, at least not out loud. Trevor got what he always wanted: full control of Shaw and Son's hospitality. Sophie received her trust, her coastal villa in Charleston, and no responsibility. I got the cliffside cottage, the one with uneven floorboards and my father's records still stacked beside the fireplace. I stayed quiet, rebuilt a little fence, trimmed the garden, slept on the couch half the time, still not used to beds that didn't shift with engine rumble beneath them. I didn't ask for anything more, and I thought foolishly, maybe that was enough to keep them at peace. Then the envelope arrived. A thick manila packet slid into my mailbox one morning, delivered by hand. No return address, but the firm name on the top page said it all: Shaw and Whitmore LLP, the family's lawyers. Trevor and my mother were suing me. They were challenging the will. The filing claimed I had manipulated my father emotionally while he was in cognitive decline, that I had forged or exaggerated my military service to gain favor, that I was not legally or morally entitled to the house. They even claimed I never served overseas. That one made me laugh just once. Then I stopped laughing, because I knew what this really was. This wasn't about the house, it was about erasing me. I called Sophie. No answer. I left a voicemail. Nothing. By the end of the day, I understood I was alone. Again. So I got to work. I pulled out every file, every deployment order, every medal certificate, and medical record I'd kept. I scanned them twice. I made backups. I prepared the only way I knew how, thoroughly. But I also knew the truth alone wouldn't be enough. Not with them. Because this wasn't just a fight about inheritance. It was about control. It was about identity. And it was about to get a hell of a lot uglier. The first time I noticed the shift in my mother's tone was years ago, long before lawyers ever got involved. It was subtle how she paused before saying my name, how she skipped over my service in conversation, like it was a phase I should have grown out of. Trevor, on the other hand, never bothered to hide it. He called me GI Barbie behind my back. Once he even said it to my face over Christmas dinner. I just laughed and poured another drink. That was how we functioned in the Shaw family. Keep it polished. Keep it presentable. Keep the shame under the rug. When Dad was alive, he was the only one who saw me truly saw me. He was a quiet man, But when I told him at 17 that I was enlisting instead of applying to business school, he didn't argue. He simply handed me an old compass he used to take hiking and said, "Whatever direction you choose, make sure it's yours." He died 2 months after I retired, peacefully in his sleep, right here in the house on the cliff. I wasn't ready to grieve him then. I'm still not sure I have. The will was read 10 days later in a private office in downtown Portland. My mother wore navy blue and didn't shed a tear. Trevor looked bored. Sophie clutched her handbag like it was a shield. The estate division surprised everyone. My name wasn't supposed to be on anything, or so they assumed. But there it was. To my daughter Meredith, I leave the salt wind home. She will know what to do with it. That was all, no explanation. Just quiet trust from a man who didn't waste words. I remember Trevor stiffening just slightly. My mother didn't react, but I caught the twitch in her jaw. Sophie looked at me, then quickly looked away. No one said anything. No congratulations, no welcome home. Just the soft shuffle of papers being signed, and for a moment I believed that was it. That maybe I could settle into the life I'd never had. Grow tomatoes, take long walks, sleep through the night. But peace doesn't sit well in a family addicted to control. Trevor couldn't stand the idea that something, anything, was beyond his reach. And my mother never accepted the daughter who didn't become her reflection. They didn't want the house, they just didn't want me to have it. So they built a lie, and they planned it well. Enough truth to make it believable. Enough noise to make me look unstable. But there's something they forgot. I didn't survive 23 years in war zones to be undone by people who once gave me birthday cards out of obligation. They thought they knew who I was. They had no idea what was coming. The headlines came fast and they came cruel. Decorated veteran or family fraud Shaw estate dispute turns ugly. One local columnist even asked whether I had weaponized sympathy to steal a house. I stopped reading after the third article. The worst part wasn't the public. It was the silence from people who used to know me. The barista at the corner cafe stopped making small talk. A neighbor I'd helped shovel out of a snowstorm 2 winters ago crossed the street when she saw me. The veterans group I once co-led paused my membership pending clarification. Trevor and my mother didn't need to win the case outright. They just needed to make me look like someone the judge wouldn't trust. The lawsuit framed me as unstable, manipulative, delusional. They had even forged a psychologist's letter, claiming I suffered from PTSD-induced memory distortion. I'd seen enough forged documents to spot a lazy one, but that didn't stop them from planting the seed. I couldn't sleep. I started walking the shoreline at night, just to move, just to feel the ground under me. I'd stand at the edge of the cliff behind the house, staring out at black waves smashing against black rock, wondering how many more blows I could absorb before something cracked. And that's when Sophie showed up. It was just after 11 one night. I had just made tea I didn't plan to drink when I heard the knock. She stood on the porch, arms wrapped around herself, face pale, like she hadn't slept in days. "I can't stay long," she said. I didn't speak, just moved aside so she could step in. She didn't sit. She didn't touch anything. She just reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a flash drive. "What's this?" I asked. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Proof. Emails, financials, draft statements, stuff I was never meant to see." My hands didn't shake, but my heart did. "Why now?" Sophie looked up at me, and for a moment I saw the girl who used to trail behind me through our father's garden, asking questions I never had answers to. "Because you're the only one who ever told me the truth, even when it hurt." And I couldn't keep pretending. She left before I could say anything else, just turned and walked back into the cold. I sat at the table that night, flash drive in hand, breathing slow and deliberate. When I finally opened it, what I found made my blood run cold. Emails between Trevor and our mother, detailing their plan months before Dad died. Financial transfers from a charity account bearing my name. Drafts of press releases accusing me of stolen valor, all time-stamped, all real. They hadn't just tried to discredit me. They had used me. And Sophie, God help her, had finally broken the family's one unspoken rule: never betray the lie. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I printed everything, every email, every transfer record. I laid them out across the dining table like a battlefield map. I read each one twice. Then a third time. I didn't cry. Not because it didn't hurt, but because the hurt was too deep for tears. This wasn't just greed. It was calculated erasure. They had drafted a version of my life. They preferred the absent daughter, the unstable veteran, the one they could quietly sweep from the family photo without anyone noticing. And they would have gotten away with it if Sophie hadn't found the courage to crack the mask. I met with my attorney the next morning. Her name was Claudia Reyes. Calm, sharp, and utterly unmoved by theatrics. She didn't gasp when she read the documents. She simply nodded and said, "We'll need forensic backup. Fast." Within days, I had a team: accountants, digital investigators, a retired JAG officer who knew exactly how military records could be forged and how to prove they hadn't been. We worked in silence precision discipline, the same way I had learned to survive the field. Meanwhile, Trevor doubled down. His legal team leaked selected documents to the press, spun narratives about mental instability, hinted that I had manipulated Sophie into turning on the family. My mother went on a local morning show and said with carefully rehearsed sorrow, "Meredith's always struggled with reality. We love her, but she needs help, not a house." She looked straight into the camera when she said it, and I felt something inside me go still. This was no longer about inheritance. It was about identity dignity, and every time someone used my silence as proof of guilt, I stayed out of the spotlight. I let them talk, I let them spin, and I waited. 2 weeks before the final hearing, I walked the cliffs behind the house again. It was dusk. The sea was restless. Sophie was waiting at the old bench near the edge, a blanket around her shoulders. "They're going to hate me," she said softly, eyes on the horizon. "They already do," I replied. "But not for what you've done, for what you've undone." She looked at me, her eyes rimmed red. "I didn't know it would go this far. I thought they just wanted to contest the will. I didn't realize that they'd burn down everything to keep control." I finished. She nodded. For a while we just sat in silence, two sisters barely speaking, yet saying more than we had in years. "I'll testify," she said, voice cracking. "You won't stand alone." I didn't thank her, not because I wasn't grateful, but because some things are heavier than words. That night, I locked the evidence in a steel case and packed my uniform jacket in a garment bag. Let them have their cameras, their statements, their spin. I was ready to speak in a language they had forgotten: truth and proof. The courthouse smelled like waxed floors and cheap coffee. I'd been in far worse places, but never one that felt quite like this, so clean, so calm, so cold. I wore a dark navy suit. Not my uniform. That was intentional. I didn't need medals on my chest to tell the truth. I needed them to listen to it without distraction. Trevor sat across the aisle in a charcoal gray suit posture, perfect smile polished. My mother was next to him, her hair pulled into a tight twist, lips drawn thin. Sophie sat one row behind them, hands folded in her lap, eyes fixed on the floor. When the hearing opened, Trevor's lawyer stood first, smooth, confident, his voice oiled with concern. He spoke of a troubled veteran of inconsistencies in my records, of deep familial distress over an unusual inheritance decision. He presented charts, timelines, expert statements built on fabrications. He called into question my character, my state of mind, even my motives for returning home. At one point, he said, "This isn't about money. It's about protecting a father's legacy from manipulation." I didn't react. I'd faced men with loaded rifles and cold eyes. This was just paper warfare. My attorney Claudia waited for the noise to settle. Then she stood. Calm, collected, surgical. She began with my verified military records certified by the Department of Defense. She presented deployment orders, letters of commendation, and my medical discharge reports. No emotion, just facts lined up with precision. Then came the digital analysis, timestamps, email trails, financial forensics. Claudia explained how funds were transferred from a veterans charity into offshore accounts tied directly to my mother and Trevor. She laid it bare without raising her voice, but the room didn't shift until Sophie was called. She walked slowly to the stand, shoulders tight, voice trembling. But she didn't waver. She testified to everything: the emails, the forged letters, the phone calls she overheard, the nights she lay awake knowing what they were doing and not yet brave enough to stop it. When she said they tried to destroy her to protect their control, I saw my mother close her eyes for the first time. Trevor didn't move. Then Claudia stood again. Your Honor, she said, we have one final exhibit to submit Defendant's Folder A, verified by 2 independent forensic teams, notarized and under seal. She looked at me, gave a slight nod. I rose, walked forward, and placed the tan folder, the one Sophie had helped bring to light, on the judge's bench. He opened it. He didn't speak at first. Then, in a low, precise voice, he said, "Close the doors. No one leaves this courtroom." I heard someone gasp. And then I heard it, boots on marble. Military police. Trevor's world began to crack, and mine finally began to steady. The judge's voice was barely above a whisper, but it cut through the room like a razor. This court is now in possession of evidence suggesting criminal fraud, document tampering, and obstruction involving federal veteran benefits. He didn't look at Trevor when he said it. The military police took position by the doors, stone-faced hands clasped in front, ready. Nobody moved. Not the reporters, not the gallery, not even Trevor's attorney, who sat frozen, lips slightly parted like the air had been knocked out of him. My mother finally blinked. Her fingers clenched her handbag until her knuckles turned white. But she didn't speak. The judge called a recess. The clerk scrambled to follow. I turned and walked back to my seat, heels silent on the floor, every step deliberate. I didn't look at Trevor. I didn't need to. His world was unraveling, slowly, publicly. And I just breathed. Sophie reached for my hand. She didn't say anything, but her fingers were warm and steady. The same girl who once hid behind me during thunderstorms now held her ground beside me while the roof of our family cracked open. When court resumed, the judge was composed, but changed. He announced that the civil proceedings would be suspended, pending criminal investigation. The inheritance claims were dismissed. The house was declared mine fully, finally without condition. But it wasn't the verdict that stayed with me. It was the silence after. The courtroom emptied slowly, like a tide pulling back. Reporters hovered near the exit. Microphones were raised, but I said nothing. As I stepped outside into the sharp Oregon wind, Sophie beside me, I felt something I hadn't in years. Not triumph, not even relief, peace. The truth had landed, and I was still standing. The Saltwind house still creaks when the wind pushes in off the water. The floorboards haven't changed, and neither has the sound the porch makes when you shift your weight just right. It's not broken. It's memory. After the court ruling, everything went quiet. Trevor disappeared behind lawyers and silence. My mother withdrew like a tide that never returned. I didn't reach out. I didn't need to. Some distances aren't meant to be closed. Sophie visits sometimes, not often, but enough. We sit on the porch with mugs in our hands and just exist. No apologies, no explanations, just shared breath between 2 people who finally stopped pretending. I started teaching at the local college, not because I needed the job, but because some part of me needed to give something back. Veterans walk into my class looking for structure, for steadiness. I tell them what someone once told me: you don't have to explain your scars to people who haven't earned your story. I thought the war ended when I came home, but I learned the battlefield sometimes follows you into family, into memory, into courtrooms with polished floors and weaponized words. But here's what they never understood. I didn't survive deployment's loss and command to crumble at the feet of lies. I didn't hold my ground for medals. I did it because dignity once taken has to be reclaimed inch by inch. I never shouted. I never begged. I just stood my ground until the truth had nowhere else to go but out into the light. Now when I sit on this porch, I don't hear ghosts. I hear peace. And for the first time in a long time, it's enough.